The reading this morning comes from the Gospel according to Luke in the 13th chapter. And it goes like this. At that time, some Pharisees approached Jesus and said, "Go, get away from here because Herod wants to kill you." Jesus said to them, "Go tell that fox, look, I'm throwing out demons and healing people today and tomorrow, and on the third day I will complete my work. However, it's necessary for me to travel today, tomorrow, and the next day, because it's impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those who were sent to you, how often have I wanted to gather your people, just like a hen gathers her chicks under her wings? But you didn't want that. Your house is abandoned. I tell you, you won't see me until the time comes when you say, 'Blessing on the one who comes in the name of the Lord.'" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So we talked a couple weeks ago about how when a verse appears in one of the Gospels, but not in the other ones, we need to take that seriously. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are what we call the synoptic Gospels. They tell the same story from three different lenses, through three different stories. It's the same way as watching a news story and reading it on your Facebook feed and watching CNN and reading it in the newspaper. It's the same story, but there's different flavors to each one of the story. Each author is trying to tell you something a little bit different about the people who are involved. Luke is very concerned about what happens in Jerusalem. Luke is a gospel about Jerusalem in many ways. Luke mentions Jerusalem 5 times more than the rest of the Bible combined. For Luke, everything is about what happens in the temple and in Jerusalem. And we hear this morning 4 verses which do not appear in the other 2 gospels. Luke is the only person who reflects on Jesus being frustrated with Jerusalem. We meet a couple interesting characters in this story. The first group that we see are the Pharisees. Now, if you are like me, you were taught that in the Bible, Pharisees are the bad guys. Pharisees universally, as a group, are the bad guys. They're the ones who are always trying to get Jesus to do something to get him in trouble so that they can kill him. But Luke gives us a slightly different version of the Pharisees. In both Luke, the Gospel, and Luke's version of the early church in Acts, the Pharisees are not nearly that monolithic. They're not one group of one mind. And if you've been in a group for any period of time, you know that there is no such thing as one mind in one group. It's one of my favorite jokes about Presbyterians. Do you know this one? If you get 4 Presbyterians in a room, how many opinions do you have? 5? Right? You cannot be in a group for very long and know that there is not one mind and one thought in the group. Groups are large and diverse. It doesn't matter if there's 4 people in the group or 4,000 people in the group. There is no such thing as one type of anything. There's no such thing as one type of Pharisee. There's no such thing as one type of Republican. There's no such thing as one type of Democrat. There are lots of different kinds of people in every group. Some of the Pharisees were trying to help Jesus. Some of the Pharisees were on Jesus' side. In fact, the last thing that Paul says before he dies, the last part of his ministry, Paul affirms again and again that he is a Pharisee. And if we're going to lift up St. Paul as one of the leaders and heroes of our faith, then we have to take the Pharisees a little bit more seriously and with a little bit more kindness. They were people just like us, trying to figure out the best path for them to survive in an empire that was unkind and wanting to suppress them, and had already, by the time Luke was written, destroyed their temple. The Pharisees here are trying to help Jesus. You see, they know that Jesus has entered into the jurisdiction of Herod Antipas, who was the leader of Galilee. Jesus had wandered into Galilee to do his work, to live his life, to do his ministry in this place. And the Pharisees knew that Jesus was in danger, real danger. It wasn't that long ago that Herod had been responsible for killing his brother, or his cousin John. The Pharisees knew Jesus was in real danger. And so they come up to Jesus and they say, Jesus, you got to get out of here. This is the only place where you are in physical danger. Go to Jerusalem where it is safe. And Jesus is having none of it. He had plans, you see. He had plans for how his ministry was going to turn out. Jesus, from the moment he stepped into the temple and out of the wilderness, had a plan. He was going to go from the top of Galilee to the bottom and end up in Jerusalem, healing, preaching, and teaching along the way, and crowds were going to follow him. The beginning of his ministry set him up for a little bit of disappointment. He stepped out in the first day and the temple erupted with praise. He stepped out into the courtyard and people followed him. He stepped out into a world that he thought was ready for him, that wanted to hear what he had to say. He thought it was going to turn out a different way. So he had plans in Galilee. 3 days. He was going to stay where he was for 3 days, ministering, preaching, teaching, healing. And today we see his frustration bubble over. He no longer has control of his ministry. I think we don't always realize how big of a sacrifice that was for him. If you've spent your entire existence as one of the three, as three in one, who get to be in control of the world, who get to look upon us and make decisions and help guide us, and then all of a sudden you're thrust into this human existence where we have no control over almost anything that happens to us. It had to be so hard. And it's today, right here in this story, when Jesus finally bubbles over with frustration. None of this had turned out the way he had planned. Jerusalem was not responding to his ministry. Jerusalem was not listening to him. He thought that if he could just go and heal and preach and teach, that everyone would see how good this news was. That maybe he wouldn't have to suffer. Maybe there was another way. But here we see a Jesus who is frustrated by people who do not listen, by people who have chosen to live differently from what he would hope for them, frustrated by a group of people who should have heard what he said and responded. After all, Jerusalem is God's city. I don't know if you ever get frustrated by other people who don't listen. I had a moment this week. I am coaching my son's under-8 soccer team. We meet Tuesdays and Thursdays nights at 5:30 at the soccer park. They've been at school all day, and so by the time they get to at 5:30 to the soccer park, the last thing they want is another adult to tell them what to do. I say, please get in line, and they all look at me like they've never seen a line before, right? What's a line? I say, you need a ball, and they all go, what's a ball? Soccer's, there's a ball, right? And then I say, you don't need a ball, and they all have balls, right? Never what I've asked them to do, always the opposite. They're trying, God bless them. But I got frustrated, because how many times in a row do you want to say, you don't need a ball? We're just going to run. So the other night I got a little frustrated, because I'd said this kid's name, 485 times. I say his name every practice so many times that I think the other coaches on the field know his name. Kevin, 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 Kevin. Now all of you know his name. So if you hear me yelling Kevin in my sleep, but like every practice, and God bless him, he's the sweetest kid in the world, but he is somewhere else. And the hardest part of being a coach is when you get to the game and they don't let you on the field. You want to go on the field, right? So we put our players on the field, and they all are brand new except for like 2 of our players. So, they don't know what they're doing. And you put them on the field, and half of my team ran the wrong direction this week, right? And so I'm standing on the sideline. Kevin, it's the other way. Kevin, it's the other way. Kevin, Kevin, it's the other way, right? It wasn't just Kevin, but, it was enough. Frustrated. Because we'd spent how many times in practice going in the correct direction? How many times before the game did I stand there and say, point at the goal that we're running towards? I had them walk onto the field and look at the goal and point at it, right? But then the ref blew the whistle and I had to stay on the sidelines. And they were responsible for themselves and immediately ran the wrong direction. Which is when I turned to my husband and said, I'm going to have to sit down for a minute. And he took over. And I drew a flower with one of our players who was not ready to play yet because she needed to draw the soccer field first, right? I had forgotten that that is not the point of coaching. The point of coaching is not for me to have little players out on the field perfectly executing every game plan. In fact, if I had a team of players out there miserably collecting and doing everything exactly perfectly, then I will have failed as a coach, because that is not the point. The point of youth soccer for 6-year-olds is to love soccer. The point of soccer for 6-year-olds happens before the game begins. It happens when I'm sitting on the cooler waiting for the next game to begin, and they all run up to me and say, Coach Liz, we're so happy to be here. Who are we playing today? The point of youth soccer is for them to get to know each other. They started talking about school together. They started asking about teachers. One of them had a birthday this week, so we all sang happy birthday together. And that is the point of youth soccer. I had forgotten in my frustration that I was succeeding in the things that really mattered. The things that really matter were not whether we scored a goal or not. We've had those games this season. The point of my coaching is to have kids who feel good about themselves and the possibilities that they have for their future. Are they going to be the greatest soccer players in the world? I don't know. That's not in my control. But are they going to want to come to soccer practice on Tuesday night? Absolutely. And that is something I can control. I can control my attitude. I can control how I coach them. I can control how much I care about whether they kick the ball with their toe or not. Don't do that. I can control myself. And I think here in today's story, what we have seen is Jesus realized that he does not have control over these people. He doesn't get a choice over what the disciples do after he dies. He doesn't get to decide how the church responds to the mission and ministry that he gave them. He does not get to control every aspect of that life. And what he realizes from this point on in his ministry is that what he can do is equip them. What he can do is give them the confidence to do what they're supposed to do. What he can do is promise that he will be with them when things are difficult and when things are hard. And friends, I have news for you. If you have not learned it by this point in your life, you should know that you have no control over anyone else. You have no control over anyone else. You can guide them, you can give them advice, you can listen to them when they come, but you cannot make their choices for them, no matter how wise you are. The only thing we can do is how we respond to those choices. The only thing that we can do is be there when they make the wrong ones, to guide them back on the path. The only thing that we can do is say, I love you, despite the choices that you've made, or maybe because of them. The only thing that we can do is remember that we have control over us. We have control over how we respond. We have control over whether or not that person feels like they can do something different or not. We have control over whether it's time for us to walk away from that person. We have control over us and nobody else. And when you let go of that, when you open your hands up enough for that, you will find peace. You will find peace, I promise you. And maybe you're a type A person like me, and so me telling you to let go and let other people be in charge of their life is the hardest thing I've ever asked you to do. I understand that. But God has given them gifts and talents just the same as you. God has a calling on their life just the same as you. God has a purpose on their life just the same as you. And when you've got your life figured out, then it's time for you to start telling other people what to do. We've got to let go. We've got to let go. We've got to stop being so frustrated with how other people live their lives. We've got to stop trying to make them into the best Christians that they can possibly be. We have to stop trying to make him into the best person that they're going to be, because that is a goal they will never reach. They're never going to live up to your standards. So maybe when we learn, like Jesus, to open up our hands a little bit, to give people the room that they need, we'll find an inner peace and a stronger relationship. And maybe they'll discover that they can do it too. Amen.